When we talk about early childhood, neuroscience provides a foundation that gives legitimacy to everything we're going to address in terms of policy and practice. And that's where I'd like to start right now. So if you think about the brain, and it's something, you know, we don't spend a lot of time thinking about, quite frankly, right? You don't spend a lot of time thinking about what's going on in your brain, but it's the brain that makes us who we are. And so what happens in terms of the development of that organ is absolutely essential to who you and I are today as we sit in this room. Three major concepts that are actually key to what we're going to be talking about. The first is that the brain develops from the bottom up. So there is a progressive development of that brain. The second is that as that progressive development occurs, there are what is known as critical windows or sensitive periods. In other words, children have to have certain experiences within a span of time in order to facilitate the progressive development of the brain. The third point, and maybe the most important, is that the brain develops based on genetic influences and environmental influences. Today, the scientists say that it's about a 50-50 split. So we can't perhaps do too much about the genetic component, but certainly environment is something that we all play a significant role in influencing. So if you did a slice from your forehead to your brain and just kind of looked at the side of it, you know, don't do it right now or maybe later either, but if you did, the brain would look something like this, very simplistically. The brainstem, the lower back region here, is fully developed at birth. The brainstem controls life functions, heart rate, body temperature, those kinds of things that must be functioning if an infant is going to survive. On top of the brainstem, you see the midbrain. Midbrain is the location primarily of the stress response system, location of sleep control, appetite, those types of things. Develops in the first 1 to 2 years of a child's life. So it's unrealistic to expect a 6-month-old to have regular sleep patterns because that part of the brain is developing in the first 2 years of life. Then you have the limbic system on top of the midbrain. Love, joy, hate, anger, fear, all of those emotions spring from the limbic region. Develops primarily in the first 4 to 6 years of life. And finally, that cortical region that all of us use on a regular basis to engage in higher level thinking activities develops primarily in the first 12 years of life. So as you can see, this brain is developing in a progressive fashion, and a lot of that development is occurring after birth when environment is going to have a significant impact on the way in which that brain develops. In fact, as that brain develops, what we are doing through experience is making all kinds of additional connections between these brain cells and developing the brain in terms of complexity over time. So experience plays a huge role in the way in which the brain develops. Now, if you take a look at this top part of our brain, this cortical region that hopefully we use on a regular basis to engage in good thinking activities, this is where we talk about, to a large degree, the sensitive periods. For instance, if you take a look at the occipital lobe in the back part of our upper part of our brain, that is the part of the brain that processes visual stimuli. So to illustrate a critical window, it is quite well established that if a child's eye, the vision is totally blocked for the first 6 months of that child's life, then corrective surgery is taken or some other corrective actions, that child is still going to be blind in that eye because the first 6 months are a critical window. What do we mean? If visual stimuli can't reach the occipital lobe, those connections between brain cells aren't stimulated and therefore aren't made. The window for that to happen is the first 6 months of life. So if it doesn't happen, it isn't going to occur. In fact, those brain cells are likely to shrivel and die if they're not used in the first 6 months. So in a very real way, we don't see with our eyes. We see with our brain. Bet you thought about that all the way here today, right? But it's amazing when you think of the role of the brain. Temporal lobe, memory, language, largely influenced by activity in the temporal lobe of the cortical region of the brain. The sensitive period here is the first 3 years of life. The more language a child experiences, the better they are able to think critically when they enter school at age 4 or 5. Now, they also develop more language based on how much language they hear. What we know here is that we can't put the child in front of the television, we can't have them listening to the radio and having the same outcomes. That language development is predicated on the relationship, the face-to-face interaction with the caregiver. So those early years and the quality of the relationships is essential to the way in which the brain is going to develop. This is probably the most important slide that I will show you. Repeated experiences become encoded in memory as expectations. And then those repeated experiences become the cause of the child forming a mental model of the world, all of which is predicated on the way in which the secure base or the caregiver relates to the child.